right, welcome back to Honest Boys Podcast. I'm Todd.
I'm Carolsue. Today we're going to be talking about coping skills,
Yeah.
what they actually are, and how they can be misinterpreted, and why there are so many conflicts about avoiding them.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Usually when people think of coping, they think about dealing with some kind of extreme situation that's, you know, how you're dealing with like survival almost. But really coping is just everyday kind of things. It's not suppression of feelings. It's not suppression of emotional output. It's not tolerating abuse. And we want to make this very clear.
Yes.
We'll say there's like a spectrum behavior kind of thing. Abusive behavior is like max, and when we talk about stuff, we're not talking about that.
No.
That takes a whole different subject matter of protection. I mean, we have services devoted to domestic partner violence and things like that. Don't think we're including that. There's also a certain peak of controlling, and controlling that honestly, when people are controlling others, we don't really believe that a lot of people should tolerate that. Like, everybody should be able to make their own choices. In my utopian world, I'm not saying that anybody needs to adapt this thinking, but everyone gets to live freely as long as it's not interfering or impacting somebody else in a physical sense.
Yeah.
Which we're going to talk about. Basically, coping is internal skill building. Now, for me, I go to the extreme because I'm all into this research and I'm always trying to find new methods for reducing stress. From my perspective, I guess I go with what we mentioned before is like the super person. Like, my goal is to literally be not bothered by anything. Like, if I could just be ultimately the Zen monkey that sits on the mountain.
That is the dream.
Yeah, it really is. I don't really want to sit on the mountain, but literally, I don't want anybody to accommodate me. I don't want anybody to change because of me. Of course, unless it's, you know, toxic behavior, and that goes into the extreme as well. But for the most part, we're going to be talking about that lower level plateaus, the annoyances, and how most of us require accommodation in certain situations where really it's what we call looking the wrong way.
That'll be our disclaimer for this episode, is that when we're talking about coping and trying to figure out how to manage our own responses to everyday annoyances, we are not talking about the extremes of abuse or violence or any of those kind of things. And our hope is to, a little bit later in the podcast series, to get one of our buddies to do an interview with us and tell us about the ins and outs of abuse and how to manage all of that.
That's right. And if we get into like coping skills with the Zen monkey example, like, of course, if Ryan Reynolds wants to call us and talk about how cool he is, you know, how he handles situations with the people in Hollywood that are always saying bad things about actors and things like that. In fact, one of our articles that came out of this had to do with the fact that I read an article that Josh Hartnett, he stopped acting for a while because of the way people were treating him. I hate to call them trolls. One thing about Honest Voice, we don't believe in a lot of those. Calling. Yeah, we don't believe in name calling, but we don't like harsh memes. Like, we really think that there's a way, and once again, not toxically positive, but realistically identify memes or sayings or quotes that are all positive. So right now you see a lot of memes about narcissism and stuff like that. So usually they start off with, you know, the only reason a narcissist tries to control you is because they're insecure. That message, what we've learned in all of our research, is it goes back to the clap back, calling out, all that kind of stuff. None of that stuff changes behavior. And, you know, we all do it. Like, you know, you're being rude right now. That doesn't make a person turn it around. It usually makes them double down sometimes or makes them even ruder. And it is the most common and socially acceptable way of handling behavior. But I want everybody to think for a moment why we are talking about this is because there are so many things that we do that are really ineffective, if not destructive, but we never stop to analyze it. Don't let any of our stuff wrap you around the axle where you just frustrates you or anything. All that we're asking is, even if you think we're full of it, consider it. Then people are crazy. There's no way you can be calm all the time or deal with everything all the time. I guess the thing that we're going on is the fact that in 10 years of learning this stuff, we know who we were 10 years ago and we know who we are now, and those are not the same people at all.
They're not. And it's not to say that we don't slip up. It's not to say that programming doesn't slip back in. We are human. Part of the reason we continue to try to learn and share this information on the podcast is because we are also still learning and want to hear back from people who are receiving this information so that we can all grow together and learn together.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. A lot of external things that you deal with, a lot of times we tell people you need to stop doing that rather than figuring out what it is about it that's bothering us. And whether or not we can develop our own coping skills so we don't need to tell other people how to act. And I'm going to start right off with just mentioning like pet peeves. I listen to a lot of people talk about their pet peeves. And from my perspective and based on my education and communication now, which is, it's a little unusual because I read everything. I read everything I can get my hands on. So I learn a lot real quick. And for the last 10 years, I've been pretty obsessed with communication and how we interact with each other. But pet peeves, to me, usually people are like, man, I can't stand it when they do this, this, and this. And they want that camaraderie. Mm-hmm. They want everybody to go, oh, I hate that. Yeah, you're right, man. I don't like it when they chew with their mouth open or they're making
tap their pen over in a meeting.
Things like that. And see, what I see now is, why can't you cope with that? Mm-hmm. Like, why do you need somebody else to stop doing something? Unless it's physically encroaching on you. Mm-hmm. If somebody's in your face and they're like yelling at you, that's different, okay? But if it's just something they're doing, I mean, you can move to another room. There are distractions, so I can understand if you're trying to read and somebody's tapping, that's different.
Yep.
You know, take that somewhere else. But there's a lot of things that people do that the pet peeve is our own perspective of it. Mm-hmm. To me, it indicates, you know, for lack of a better word, it indicates sort of a weakness on our part not to be able to deal with simple things.
Yeah.
Case in point, I was with somebody at one time a long time ago, and one of my favorite songs came on. We were just driving, and I was just like, oh, I love this song. And the person started yelling at me like, can't you just sit still? There's like no traffic, so it's not stress, so I know I'm not such a distraction that I'm going like this while they're driving. You know, that would be one thing to say, hey, can you just sit still? I literally can't see. But I was just bobbing my head. And there's a lot of those. So I heard one person one time that when they're sitting together with their significant other on the couch, that one of them might get tired of sitting and they'll stand up. And the other person would be like, I don't like it when you stand up. You need to sit back down. And that's serious control. That person wants to stretch. I just couldn't imagine living in a household where everything that I did that really wasn't impacting anyone else was being criticized or modified in some way that I had to basically be that other person. So it's like, if I'm not exactly like you, then that's a problem. Mm-hmm. And you, instead of coping with it and being your own individual, you're trying to tell me to do everything I can to make myself more like you.
Yeah.
And that's basically what we're talking about right now. Like, sometimes we need to ask ourselves, and we never do. Sometimes we need to ask ourselves before we launch into, hey, can you stop that? We need to ask ourselves, is this something that I am having a problem with because of me, or is it something that they're giving me right now? And there's a lot of examples out there. Basically, you just want to say, when somebody comes up to you and say, can you stop that? You just want to turn and say, can you mind your own business? And that's basically the bulk of it, you know, and we can throw in, you know, what they call, and I don't like this term, we've mentioned it in our books a few times, but like the Karens out there, the Karens and the Kevins, I guess. I don't know what the male counterpart is.
That's what I've heard, huh?
Yeah, but those are individuals that they have been identified as people with deep insecurities where they don't feel like they have enough control over things in their lives. Mm-hmm. So they see things like kids playing on a playground that's across the street, coming over there and saying, you kids need to quiet down. I mean, it's literally a playground outside. And I've seen situations where they've come into confrontations with people because they didn't like the noise when they could have closed their window or put on headphones. I mean, it's a play area.
Right.
It's a common
area. It's what it's meant for.
And it's midday. You know, It's not like it's 1 o'clock in the morning and they're trying to sleep. So
right.
These are the kind of things that we're talking about. Is it me or is it you? And you need to ask yourself that. And we rarely do, especially if it's become a pattern of behavior over time. You think it's natural to just tell people that they must accommodate your insecurity or your something that's bothering you in the moment because you created that bother. You decided in that moment, that bothers me, even though it's not really affecting you or interfering with you in any way. And instead of me learning to increase my coping skills, which overall, believe it or not, it's going to improve not just your sanity. I do want to say sanity, but it's going to improve your overall wellness and your comfort, because the more you can cope with, eventually what that evolves into is it just completely being unnoticeable. Like when you learn to accept certain things, you don't notice it as a problem. But if you identify it as a problem, you fixate on those problems.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And if it seems to you like the world overall has become a little more intolerant, a little more impatient, and that coping skills are harder to come by, talking about these Karens and Kevins, that's a big part of it. A lot of our social media attention is paid to watching videos or memes of people doing exactly that. Maybe we think in our brains it's funny to watch some Karen get shut down, but the more we are exposed to that kind of behavior, the more normalized it can feel.
Exactly.
And so what we're saying is that a little bit of mindfulness about what irritates you and how you might be able to cope with it without expecting change from other people.
Accommodation.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Then the easier it is for you to continue to keep your own internal peace, which is the whole thing we're here for, is to help us all keep our own internal peace and not allow external forces to impact us unnecessarily.
Yeah, and that's where real strength comes from. In society, like we talked in the anger program, people that yell, we've created this perception that that's power, and it's really not. It's fragility. It's individuals that can't deal with a situation, and they become frightened to the point where they mask it with anger, you know, especially if you've been socialized as a male to never show fear. Even when you're scared to death, you will substitute anger to basically overshadow that fear response. Dang, when you ask the people afterwards, and that's basically where most of our research has come from, is that we have de-escalated, but then one of the things that we do after we de-escalate an individual is we sit with them and we talk to them, sometimes for hours. And we'll be like, so man, now that you're calmed down, what started all this? And this is where more and more of the stories came out. You know, it's just like, I thought I was going to get kicked out on the street tonight. So we could see that it's all fear-based, unless, like we said, unless you're being physically attacked, it usually comes from fear.
So here's what coping is not. Coping doesn't mean we're pretending we're fine. If we can learn this master skill, then we actually will be fine with someone sitting 10 feet away from us tapping a pen incessantly through a meeting. We actually will notice it and we'll move on. Coping is also not ignoring pain. Referring back to our disclaimer, if we're talking about someone who is physically or emotionally impacting you directly, real close to your body and putting you in danger, that's a different thing. So we're not talking about ignoring pain. We are talking about how to stop focusing on things that, when you think about it, really don't have any true impact on what we're doing. And what coping is learning how to process discomfort without outsourcing regulation. So without expecting the entire world around us to change, which I think, as we've seen, most of us don't have any control on how that goes. We're not going to wait for that. We're going to internally self-regulate so that we can maintain our own peace.
Okay, so one thing, we always do this disclaimers because right now we're in a mindset in society where we get angry at everything. We just dismiss it. That's stupid. If it's a difference in your opinion. So we're asking you to just consider some of this stuff. So first of all, if you're asking for accommodation all the time, what you're doing is you're basically throwing out eggshells for everybody else to walk on.
So true.
Okay, so that's something to consider. It creates a fragile persona. The more you request accommodation, the more you're not developing your own coping skills, which you don't realize actually contribute to other things as well. So you may be asking somebody to stop doing something that's in the corner of your eye that you seem to want to latch onto it and just don't want them to do what they're doing. That'll contribute to everything you do, which it leads to sort of a miserable existence. You know, when you're looking at problems all the time, that's all you see. You don't get to see the joy anymore. We'll give you an analogy about that later. Yeah, okay, we'll do it now.
Let's do it now.
All right, so I came up with this analogy when I was teaching CIT because I've seen it so many times, and it has to do with subtle influences in society. The analogy I came up with, it has to do with, like, say you want to plant flowers because you love flowers and you think that would be a nice activity to get involved in, and you got a back patio and you got a little chair back there and a little table, and you think, wow, I could just go back there and relax every day and watch my flowers grow. Yeah.
Yes.
So you go out there and you plant these flowers and they start to grow, you're enjoying them and you're sipping your tea and it's making your life great and you have no stress, and you realize that bringing that threshold down, you notice that other things don't stress you out as much either because you're not on edge most of the time. So it's actually contributing to your wellness. But then a weed pops up and then you see that weed and you get up and you're like, okay, I got to get that out of there. So go back to enjoying the flowers. And then a couple of days later, more weeds pop up. So you start pulling those weeds, and eventually what happens is you start walking out on the patio and you're looking for weeds. You're not looking for flowers anymore, and that's how subtle. You're not looking at the flowers and enjoying the flowers. You're just seeing the weeds and being annoyed by those weeds. And that's how socially we get caught up in these things, where you notice that, where people will tell you, you know, ever since you've been hanging out with them, your behavior's changed. And I have been told that before, and I really appreciate it when I have a close friend that says, you're starting to act a little different. It's not in a good way.
Right.
Yeah. So I appreciate that kind of stuff, but it's good to have friends that will give you that kind of feedback, but that's where that subtle influence comes from. So if you're constantly asking for accommodation, eventually you won't be able to cope with anything, the small things. And right now we have people in society that are like shooting people because their chicken nuggets were cold when they got served at the window, or there's several shootings on our local highways from road rage and things like that. Just the coping levels have just gone way down. But there are times where accommodation is the right thing to do. And even our society sort of messed that up, because think of a simple case in point. You've got somebody, you live in an apartment complex, and somebody starts playing their music as loud as they possibly can at 2:00 in the morning on a Tuesday, and you've got to go to work, and you go over there, and no matter how kind, you say, hey, could you please turn the music down? Or even if it's the law in the area, those people will still look at you like you're the bad guy.
That's right.
You know, what's your problem, man? We're just trying to enjoy ourselves. It's like, I literally cannot sleep. And my logic is that I need sleep in order to survive. You do not need loud music in order to survive. I think I should win this argument.
Yeah, no matter what you may think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So those kind of things is how I measure it. So that's an opportunity for accommodation. But when you are constantly asking for accommodation, you're not growing at all. And we've been in the mental health business for over 20 years. 20. Yeah, over 20 years. And I left and came back, and even a lot of people that I had worked with in the past, I can see they have not had any growth whatsoever, you know, from my perspective.
Absolutely.
You know, this is just my assessment, my opinions. There's people that have actually, in the social work field, they'll actually brag that they haven't picked up a book since college, which terrifies me because I'm like, things have changed. You know? So your therapeutic perspective is actually sort of outdated now. And you can see it. You can see it that a lot of times their theoretical perspectives are wrong. And you know that. It just makes sense. But you can't correct them either because they just don't have the coping skills to deal with critical feedback. So it becomes this feedback loop where they don't learn anything, and they are also offended if you try to teach them. So they just sort of stagnate. Yeah, stagnate. And we've known people that are in their 50s, and we've known them since they were 30, and they literally have not changed in any positive way whatsoever, and they're miserable. That's the thing we're getting at. We don't want people to be like us. Our whole focus is to try to reduce the misery that people bring upon themselves, like we used to.
Yeah.
We used to create these problems, as I call them.
This is true.
Yeah.
And this is what coping skills can help us do, is to manage exactly when we're going to allow the external world to impact our internal peace, and to let that happen as minimally as possible, and to build up the skills so that there are certain things that may bother other people immediately that we don't even notice anymore.
Yeah, and there's a lot of experiential things people avoid because of a lack of coping
That's
skills,
true.
you know? And this is something to think about, and we sort of press this issue, is that if other people can do it, then it's doable. So why not try to approach it? But then it goes back into that feedback loop again. Like, a lot of people won't try new things because they don't want to get criticized if they don't get it right the first time, which is another problematic thing. Like, we should be able to cope with the fact that we're going to try something. We might even, I'm going to pull out the big F word here, fail at it, and then try again. But the critical feedback and the condescension, and sometimes even people making fun of you for those things, shuts people down. They don't try new experiences. So once you get those coping skills in place, when people laugh at you, you can laugh with them instead of like be offended by it. And I've been in that situation before, and sometimes I see it on TV, but it's really funny when people will be like, "Yeah, you really messed that up, didn't you?" And I'd be like, "Yeah," and that's it. And they're like they didn't get the
joke failed.
They didn't. Yeah, I'm like, "Yeah, I sure did. You're exactly right." So it's sort of funny to watch that. So what we want to try to get away from is expecting people to change their tone, their behavior, and their preferences, just to prevent an emotional reaction from you. Also, these emotional reactions, like we've said before, program the people around you. So people will be less apt to share things with you now. They might be less apt to be honest with you now because they can't be, because they know you're going to react in a certain way because you won't cope with critical feedback. And then, you know, for your quality of life, if you're miserable around other people, that's a problem. And a lot of this misery comes from an insecurity around connecting with others. Like, a lot of people become insecure. Like, the first thing I hear, like when a new employee comes, say you got one of those cubicle rooms, it was all cubicles. I heard people say, "Well, I'm not here to make friends." What I hear is somebody that's sort of lonely and insecure that has trouble connecting with others. So this is their
Getting
front.
out ahead of it.
Yeah, this is their front to say, "I don't make friends." But the problem is that a lot of that comes from insecurity. It comes from also being hurt many times. A lot of people, this is their new coping skills, which will shut down their social interaction and their social development, but it shuts down growth. I mean, we've seen people 40, 50s, and 60s that still have the emotional coping skills of a 20-year-old or a 15-year-old because that's what they were given. That's what they learned. And we saw this with the pandemic quite a bit. The problem with the pandemic was that coping shut down, and the kids that were in their developmental stages did not learn any coping skills. In fact, it sort of got worse because adults were not coping with it very well, with all the animosity against wearing masks and everything that people were crusading against. That all came out with anger. And the simple thing, once again, all these situations could have been handled without emotion. You can simply say, no, I'm not doing that, rather than, you can't make me do it. You know, it became a explosive, angry kind of thing. And that's what kids saw. So now you can see they are struggling. I read stuff from teachers, and like kids are breaking down from like not having a pencil or breaking the lead. They're starting to cry because they have learned that there is extreme emotional reaction that has to come from discomfort. And discomfort is just information. It's just giving you a signal that there's something about this that bothers you. And that's where you have to question, is it something that I need to get rid of, or is it something I need to learn to handle better? And that's where your growth comes from. When you can overcome these things, that's where your changes really come in handy. And especially if you're in situations where you have a lot of people that are doing this to you. Once you build these coping skills, it's very simple, you know, just like with the Quinta Brunson video that I was talking about. When you get somebody who's like, come on over tonight, and you're like, no, I don't feel like I'm going to stay home. I just want to relax. And they're like, what, you don't want to hang with me? It's like, no, it's not that at all. I just don't want to come over. And what happens is that sometimes people just start to use a mask of anger so they don't get that feedback.
Oh, yes.
And then it becomes normalized.
Can be very effective, unfortunately.
Yeah, and so you approach every situation with, I don't want to do that, because you're afraid people are going to take advantage. But really what works best is to develop the coping skills, just to continue to say, nah, that's okay. I appreciate it, but it's not about you. It's all about me. I want some peace and quiet. And if you can't respect that, in all honesty, if a friend can't respect that, you want some quiet, then maybe it's time to evaluate those relationships. And that's just the honest truth. You know, it's not everybody mixes together well, and a lot of times we force relationships that probably be better off if we just sort of cut ties in some capacity.
So as we mentioned earlier, coping applies to discomfort, not danger. We're not asking you to put up with abusive behavior, with things that really truly do personally impact your peaceful enjoyment of whatever you're doing. We're talking about making sure that we have the internal strength to manage the behavior of others that doesn't directly impact us. Maybe you're sitting in an airport and someone 2 aisles over is chewing gum with their mouth open, and your preference is not to do that, but it is in no way impacting your time sitting in that airport chair. That's what we're talking about.
Exactly. And, you know, a minor clarification is, if you are in an abusive situation, please get help right away. And you can identify that by, if somebody is stomping all over your boundaries, if you're saying no to things but they're forcing a yes, or things like that, or if you need protection of any kind. Definitely that's not a coping strategy.
No, that's
not
right.
a thing to cope with.
Drop everything and get some support. And if you need to know where to get support, send us an email. We'll make sure you have our contact information. We can help get you connected.
Yeah, I guess a simple way of looking at it is, we're talking about the things that applies to irritation, frustration, differences in opinion. That's a big one too. For some reason, a lot of people think that, well, if they don't think the same way I do, then they're trying to say that I'm wrong. And that's not what people are sharing opinions. And we've seen a massive spike with this political climate right now. It's like, there are ways that two people can have completely two different perspectives and two different party affiliations and still get along. It's not about trying to convince somebody else to think exactly like you do. It's about understanding their point of view and just living with it. And that's all it is. And that takes coping skills.
It does.
And a lot of people are just disregarding them altogether. If you don't agree with me, then I don't want to have anything to do with you. And it's going to be a very sad division, you know, when things start changing and those kind of oppositions don't exist anymore, say in 3 years. I just got to say it. I'm not taking a side or anything. I'm just saying that all of this animosity now is going to be a residual effect of destroyed relationships because of lack of coping skills. And then it's going to be hard to rebuild. But we also have a podcast for that. That's kind of how to rebuild after conflict.
So, as with most things, a little bit of introspection and self-reflection can be a helpful tool. So most of what's happening to us is actually happening inside of us. So if something bothers you, if you can, take that pause. We love a good pause here at Honest Voice.
Yeah, we do.
Take that pause and figure out whether, is it truly happening to me, or am I having an internal reaction to something that's external? That's kind of our first trick to remind ourselves that we have more ownership over that emotional landscape than we think we do.
Yeah.
So question that.
Yeah, and we create a lot of problems with expectations, and I think we brought that up subtly. And I'll give you a little, for instance, I was sitting with somebody one time and trying to help her with something with the computer, and she kept making mistakes, and she's like, gosh, I don't know how you have so much patience. And I said, well, you know, patience is a choice, and I'm a blurter. I mean, I blurt what I think, and that's once again probably why I don't have a lot of friends. But anyways, she looked at me really weird, and I said, well, a lot of people say they lack patience, but if you look at patience, you can explain it from impatience is an easier way to do it. And all impatience is creating an expectation, and usually it's an idealistic expectation, the wonderful way it would be with butterflies, unicorns, and rainbows.
Yes.
And then comparing it to your current situation and say, that's not the same. And it needs to be, and that's where your frustration comes. So when you're frustrated, you're thinking, like, say somebody's not moving fast enough. You're thinking they should be moving faster, your ideal situation, but they're not. And that's what's frustrating you. This is all in your own mind in that moment.
Self-creation.
So unfortunately, for those of you who think impatience is a behavioral trait, it's learned. It's something that we pick up as we grow, and it becomes stored in there in the subconscious, and it becomes how we perceive certain situations that in that moment we've decided we don't like.
Yeah.
And that's really what they are, unfortunately. And a lot of common sources of these has to do with not just expectations, but assumptions. Like we think, well, it should have gone better. Why?
Right.
If you've never done it before, especially, how can you predict the outcome? You don't know your skills. You don't know all the variables involved. So we beat ourselves up for a lot of those kind of things. Like, that should have been easier. I should have known how to do that. None of those things matter. Like, if you're saying those things, you're just creating your own frustration in those moments.
We also sometimes feel like we need to control things that we have no business thinking we can control. So, you make a dinner reservation for yourself and your visiting family. And you travel to a restaurant and you've made a reservation and there's unexpected traffic. And if I feel like I should have somehow predicted that traffic, and now I worry that we're going to be late for this reservation, and all of a sudden I am frustrated over things I had no way to predict, then I have changed my entire internal environment and probably the environment of people around me because of my own expectations and my lack of ability to say, oh man, what a bummer. A little bit of traffic. I guess we'll need to call the restaurant and say we're going to be a few minutes late.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that a lot of times we will publicly beat ourselves up for that. We'll be like, man, that was so stupid of me. Gosh, what was I thinking? That's a behavior that you need to identify, just what we call absolute, just from every perspective, because what you're doing is you're putting shame on yourself, but you're also identifying that that's a tactic that you use with other people as well. So if you're beating yourself up, you need to consider that, first of all, that's not helping anybody. Nobody around you wants to see you feel worse than you already do.
Right.
So there's no reason to beat yourself up. And if you're doing that because you've impacted somebody else, you've now taken that concern for the people you've impacted and you've focused on yourself.
You have.
So you've literally made a problem that you created for others or contributed for others.
Nice.
And now you've decided to completely ignore the impact on them and go back to thinking, I mean, it's the truth though.
No, it is.
And you want this accommodation. You want everyone around you to go, no, man, it's not your fault. No, don't be so hard on yourself, when you've inconvenienced literally everybody else. So it sounds silly, but it's common. And I know some of you are like, oh man. And one thing, I will do a disclaimer right here. If you take our videos to somebody else and say, I need you to watch this, please don't do it maliciously, because I guarantee you, it's like everything else that we said. If you force this on somebody, coerce this on somebody, or use it as to make fun of somebody, this is exactly what you do. That's not going to change their behavior.
You'll lose the message.
Yeah, you'll lose the message completely. So if you really, if you want to abuse somebody else, then I can't stop you. But
and as we've said before, this may not be the podcast for you if that's part of the goal.
Exactly. Yeah, and, please don't use these things for bad. So if you really do want to help somebody change their behavior, and this particular subject matter is consistent with what you're dealing with in your own life, please use one of our previous videos. Like, hey, I want to talk to you about a sensitive subject, and I'm thinking that maybe if it doesn't come from me and you see it, other people talking about it, at least consider it. Don't use it as a judgment, and please don't use it to make fun of their behaviors, because you're not going to change it. I use a news feed, and I can tell you at least 1/3 of that news feed on some days is just where somebody called somebody out and somebody clapped back and somebody slammed some other person, and that's not going to help anybody. It doesn't change their behavior. But if it makes you feel better to insult somebody, then I guess that can be cathartic. But man, there's so much more you could be doing with your time. It doesn't need another person's audience.
That's right.
And that's another thing when it comes to coping. A lot of people cope with isolation, loneliness, things like, just like that person that says, I'm not here to make friends. A lot of people that make a lot of negative comments on the internet do that because they're lonely and they're insecure and they don't know how to communicate effectively because this is how they've been taught to communicate. And it is beyond their means. And it's very hard in this current climate to admit that you don't understand something or you don't know how, because so many people say, I should know how to do that. And it's like, why? You've never been taught that. And that's another thing with coping. You know, fear of being wrong is a big deal. Or like I said earlier, fear of exposure to something that's different. And different is okay. There can be more than one way to do something correctly.
Absolutely. So judgment has a big role to play in our struggles to cope with certain things. So when we place a judgment on a person or a behavior or a situation, we're amplifying our own emotional distress. And if we choose to express that judgment to the other person, then we're amplifying their emotional distress as well. So it turns what might be a neutral event into a personal offense, which just adds more stress, adds our fixation on the negative, and doesn't help us to grow stronger and move forward and cope with things that we can't control.
Yeah, if there's a hidden insult in what you're saying, it's not constructive.
Right.
It's not going to help. If you're saying people that do what you're doing, they always end up being, that's not a good way of approaching that. It's just saying, you know, this behavior looks like it frustrates you more than it helps you. So what's a nicer way to do that? Whatever you're doing. And when we were talking about expectation, a real simple example is how many of you, and we use this in CIT, and it gets a lot of laughs. Not saying you have to laugh, but I don't know why I trip myself up like that sometimes. Holding the door open for other people. You know, it's a kind gesture. And then when somebody walks through that door and they don't acknowledge you, how many of you go, "You're welcome," and you scream it across the room, across the Wawa, across, you know, wherever you are. And that in itself is identifying it's a conditional kindness. You're not really doing something nice for them. You're doing something so you can get a compliment for it. So it's more self-centered than it is actually helping another person. And you don't know what that person's going through. I've seen people that they just lost a family member or they're having a bad day at work. A lot of people have bad days at work. You know, the end of the day is like not the time to criticize anybody for
This is the
anything.
truth. They're all tapped out by that point.
Exactly. So those kind of things, why can't you just be happy that you did something kind? And if you can get out of that mindset of expectations, it really will set you free. If you truly can give a gift or a kind gesture or a compliment without any expectation, even if you can visualize them getting angry at you because they might feel embarrassed or something like that. If you can look at these things and just know that, well, you did the right thing.
Yes.
And if you can maintain that mindset, it really doesn't matter what comes back. It just matters that you create an influence that other people can mimic, because it's the modeling a certain behavior, which takes a long time to influence other people. It's much more effective though than condescension or insults or force. Even, you know, if you don't change your behavior, bad things are going to happen. I'll punish you or ground you or whatever you, that it doesn't help change those behavior. Yeah. And if you're using these tactics, it is an identifier that you have difficulty coping with certain things. Like you're worried when you're trying to correct somebody's behavior, it's going to provoke a confrontation. So you come in hot because you think that's going to make them immediately comply and back down. But you're not helping anybody, including yourself. Yeah. It rarely works that way.
Yeah. So some examples of things that we might think that will give us a clue that we are expressing a judgment about something we might not need to. Well, they should know better than that. No, not really for us to say. Not really relevant in our ability to either choose to ignore it and move forward, right?
Yeah.
That's disrespectful. And again, if someone's disrespecting you personally, it's a different situation. But if you're labeling something that has absolutely no impact on you whatsoever, that's a judgment that we may not need to focus our time on making.
Yeah, and with crisis intervention, it's sort of funny. People's definitions of disrespect are like pretty different from mine. Like, I don't care what you call me. For me, disrespect is if I can't cope with it. You know what I mean? If they hit something that hits hard enough for me to feel disrespected, like I'm not going to let a boss just degrade me. You know, that would be disrespecting because that's a corporate environment. But just like the average individual, say I make a turn and I didn't see somebody and they're like, "You idiot," I'm not offended by it. I mean, I made a mistake. That's real easy. I don't really care. To me, every insult is just somebody hiding behind a car going, "You poopy head," and you can substitute that for every insult. And you can turn that into sort of a comedic thing. Like when I hear people, you effing this and you effing that, and I'm like, he's calling me a poopy head right
That's
now.
right.
You can see that it stays in the frontal cortex. Yeah, I don't need to try to control this person or show that I am more dominant than you or more powerful than you. I just honestly say whatever you want, unless I'm in a confined situation where it's unprofessional behavior. You know, there's parameters, there's variables.
Of course, yeah.
Like we keep saying.
Always variables. So this is where the superpower of reframing can be so helpful for us, right? So as we start to identify the things that maybe are pet peeves or things that we get frustrated about that really don't impact us, and we're looking for a new way to look at things, reframing can be really, really helpful. Bottom line is, if other people can tolerate it, if you think about the most peaceful person you know, or your absolute superhero of just zen calm, we know that it can be done.
One day.
And if it can be done, then we can practice it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look at situations and train your brain to start learning these coping skills. When you're in a situation and you see people getting frustrated, but you see one person in the room that's just like, yeah, no big deal, we got this. Go over to them, say, how do you do that? How do you just look at a situation and be calm? And he's like, usually you'll get the feedback of, that just doesn't impact me. And one of the things where it would help me discover this was, interestingly enough, I started interviewing martial arts masters. I would go to different schools and I would talk to their top people, not just like the black belts, but people who have been engaged in it for like 10 years or more. But, I asked them how they handle confrontations. They're like, they do anything to de-escalate it because they don't have their ego to protect, because they understand the fragility of life.
Right.
I mean, they literally are trained to shut somebody's system down. They know how easy it is to hurt another person, sometimes severely, sometimes
lethally.
Lethally, yeah, that's the word I was looking for. But they do everything to avoid it, which is a different mindset from the scrapper or the, what, you want to fight about it? Like the joke on Family Guy. A lot of times there's a character like, oh, you want to fight about it? But they don't have that in them because they don't have those kind of insecurities. They don't feel a need to prove anything to anyone because they are comfortable with their own coping skills, their own confidence, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's helpful to remember as we're trying to reframe things that have previously irritated us, that people have different histories. We have a famous saying in this house that Todd invented for us, which is that everybody's different.
Yeah.
You have no idea where people are coming from. And and again, if it's not impacting you personally, then people are doing things that seem odd to you. Everybody's different.
Yeah, I used to hear growing up all the time, like weird stuff would happen and I'd hear one of my parents go, what were they thinking? It's like, there's no way to know. Right. You know what I mean? There's no way to know because they think differently than us. They've had different experiences than us, different educational backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, religious backgrounds. I mean, there are so many variables that dictate how we are formed, how we grow up. So judging other people's perspectives by your own education is, if you want to judge a fish by how well they climb a tree, have at it.
So we've talked a lot about the role of that perception of control in our challenges with coping. And control in most cases is absolutely an illusion. So it can be a substitute for coping, and it can make us feel less stress if we take control of something we shouldn't have to control. But it doesn't do anything to grow our own ability to manage our emotions, keep our own peace, and keep the peace with the people around us.
That's true.
Yeah.
You become what you focus most on. So if, like the weeds analogy, if you're focusing on what's different, what bothers you about other people, that is what you're going to see. That's all you're going to see. But if you can find something that you can relate to or share with somebody, that's a whole different perspective. Just showing somebody, hey, when I'm in those situations, this is how I handle it. What do you think? Rather than saying, when you do that, you need to change your ways. There's a lot easier ways to handle these situations if you really do need to press the change. But what happens in those moments when you're demonstrating, modeling, or asking questions or using curiosity is that you grow as well, because now you're listening to another person's perspective. Even if you dismiss it,
absolutely,
you've heard another piece of information that you didn't have before. That's new. That's growth.
Yeah, and control may feel strong, but in actuality, it's pretty fragile, because you're expecting that the control you want over one other person or 10 other people, that all of those other folks are just going to allow themselves to become your puppets, and they're just going to do whatever you want and read your mind all the time. And it means that your emotional state internally is dependent upon the behavior of others, and that's exactly what we're trying to get away from.
Yeah, I had this situation one time when I worked in one of those areas that had multiple cubicles, and I had my fleece jacket on, and
I knew that's what this
tag was hanging out, and one of the workers came past and goes, "Todd, your tag's sticking out of your jacket." I was like, "Okay, thanks." And then I went back to work, and then like 10 minutes later, "Todd, your tag's still hanging out." And I'm like, "Okay, thanks, I appreciate that." And this isn't an office. I mean, it's not even a formal office. I mean, there's people wearing jeans, there's people wearing hoodies, you know what I mean? So finally, and it really confused the person the third time, is like, hey, Todd, I told you, your tag's hanging out. I turned around and I looked at him, I go, that sounds like more your problem than my problem. And that's a perfect example. That's that looking the other way thing. Why was this person, I mean, my tag was not sneaking off my jacket, going over and tapping her in the head or attacking her in any way. Wasn't making squeaky noises. It wasn't chewing gum loudly or anything like that. It was just hanging out of the back of my jacket. So those are the kind of things that we're talking about. Those are the kind of things where people go in and pick at every little thing that people are doing and try to change them, which is an identifier that they just don't cope very well with things that are not. It shows a certain fragility. There's no happiness in that for that person. Yeah. I identified as a sadly miserable person, but they also pursued that misery. It was definitely a weed situation where they were constantly fixated on what's wrong with the world and rather than how could we make it better.
And reversely, the first couple of times they pointed that out to you, you tried to model coping by just saying, okay, thanks, and continuing on with your life. And then at some point you had to interject to set a boundary because it was becoming personally invasive for you.
Yeah, I was trying to work.
You were.
This person was literally distracting me from trying to read something because my tag was screaming at them. So think about this, the cost of control, like we say, it creates an increased resentment, not only for the people around them, but for themselves as well. They end up taking their lack of ability to control you and they start resenting you instead. So it builds disconnection instead of connection. And it's obviously a form of decreased resilience. I mean, when they can't handle anything around them that is out of place, that's problematic.
Yeah. So we've got some practical tools for you. We love to bring tools and tricks to help us all build some coping instead of demanding that the world shape itself into our liking.
Yeah, we will give you a little piece of honest voice philosophy. One of the things that when we started forming these books is that I read a lot of self-help books because I have been a mess my whole life. But I've read a lot of self-help books, and one of the things that always frustrated me about self-help books is they'll tell you what's wrong with you. Or there'll be a whole book on where you should go with your lives, but they don't tell you how to get there. So one of the things that we stress really, really hard in all of our books from Honest Voice is that, we identify the problem. We tell you why that problem is a problem. We tell you what a better way is. And then we not only show you a way to pursue that better way, but we also show you how to sustain it. So that's like our basic 5 or 6 tenets of Honest Voice. Everything we do, we want to help you basically improve, grow, basically want to reduce your misery.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of negativity around us right now. So if there are ways internally that we can reduce that, it'll be all for the better.
Yeah. And, in a very selfish side benefit is that it helps us practice our own skills because the world is crazy for all of us right now, ourselves included. And so talking through these things on camera and writing about them helps us to remember to practice them too.
Yeah, one of our little mottos is that we write books that we want to read.
That's right.
So really it is because we both, not only after we produce these, we swap them and we proofread them ourselves more than once. Yeah, before we actually go to publication, we've proofread it twice. So unless we make a correction and then add an error in that correction, they're pretty foolproof. Yeah.
All right, so some tools that we can use to build coping instead of asking others to accommodate us. If we find ourselves feeling frustrated or uncomfortable with something someone else is doing, name that feeling. I was always taught when I was young that you shouldn't chew gum with your mouth open. It's really stressing me out that person is over there chewing gum, probably because I can hear my parents' voice in my head telling me very loudly not to chew gum with my mouth open.
Yeah.
There it is. That's the whole source that helps me understand that the discomfort is mine. It comes from inside my own brain. Doesn't have anything to do with them. Maybe that helps me relax and shift my focus to something else.
Yeah, I mean, my mentality has always sort of been weirdly like people sitting next to each other and even far apart, and all of a sudden a person will look over and be like, can you chew with your mouth closed? And I would be like, can you stop looking at me while I'm chewing with my mouth open? I wouldn't do that, of course. That's the mentality.
The thought,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not making a lot of noise that it's actually disturbing them in that moment. It was a casual glance and they noticed something bad and then tried to control it, but it wasn't really impacting them until they looked at it, created a judgment,
That's right.
created an expectation, and then attacked it.
Yep. So we want to name the feeling. We want to identify the assumption we're making about the behavior of somebody else or the environment around us and ask what's actually really happening versus what we're imagining is happening.
Exactly.
And make our decisions on what's really going on.
I know it can sound frustrating, but for the things that we say, you're making me mad, you're pissing me off, you're doing something that I'm having trouble coping with in the moment. It's really not on the other people. And I have to stress this from a parenting standpoint. If you're putting that on your kids, I'm just going to say it because the books won't, and this is honest voice, you're doing damage.
Yeah.
If they keep coming up to you and, mom or dad, and all of a sudden you explode and you're like, hey, you guys just sit quietly for 20 minutes. If you haven't taught them how to sit quietly for 20 minutes, then that's not on them. And if you haven't taught them how to self-soothe, if you haven't trained them on these behaviors that you are forcing on them in the midst of anger, it does damage. It does long-term damage. We already talked about how words shape us. And in our book, we talk about generational differences in communication, which, we didn't even realize impacted us.
So true.
And our parents didn't realize impacted us. And their parents didn't realize how it impacted them that spread it to us. So we're not blaming anybody or calling anybody out. We're just saying that the things that we have on us now, that we've gotten on us, the negativity, the influence and things like that, it is changeable.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be this way, but we're not shaming anybody for the fact that it exists. So keep that in mind. That's why we're hoping our podcasts help, because it's private. You can watch this with your headphones on.
Absolutely.
And you don't even have to let anybody know that we identified your behavior. So be comfortable, feel safe with us. And like I said, if you want clarification, please contact us.
Yeah. What we know is that most of us are doing absolutely the best we can with what we have. Our hope is to bring more tools, more insight, a little bit of context into why some of these behaviors exist and why some of them have gotten so out of hand, so that we can understand it better and stop feeling like it's completely beyond our control to manage our own peace. Because it's not, and we're here to help.
And I'm sorry, I took us off on a tangent, but you were giving us some really awesome tools.
That's okay.
About things to reframe yourself.
So we want to try to understand what's going on in our own internal mind. And then we want to use these little phrases to kind of soothe ourselves. Once we've determined someone's chewing gum with their mouth open doesn't actually impact me, we're going to say things like, this is uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous. I don't need to like this to be able to handle it, and this will pass. Maybe I can put in some headphones or look in another direction and not find myself so stressed out about it.
And one thing that I've adapted, maybe I go a little too far with it, but I sort of pride myself on the person that I am now compared to the person I was 10 years ago. And what I do is almost giggle to myself. 10 years ago, that would have really irritated me. And I'm pretty thankful that now I don't let it bother me, and I can contribute to this person's peace. They can chew with their mouth open all day long until their jaws get sore. I don't care, but they're happy doing it, so fine.
Yeah, exactly.
So the things that these tools will help you with is they'll help you stay present in the moment. Just focus on yourself. Stay present with what your mind is doing to yourself right now, because I can't stress this enough. We create a lot of our own problems.
Yeah.
Just if you're panicking over something in the past or panicking about the future, that's a created problem, because you can just plan. You can plan without emotion. You can just say, worst case scenario, if this happens, I'm going to be ready for it in some capacity. But you don't need to go, what if we do this?
Yeah.
What if that happens? What if this? We see this stuff all the time, and it's just like, all right, settle down. So monitoring yourself like this will lead to so many other benefits. And this is another opportunity for the pause.
That's right.
Just pause for a second. Close your eyes, take a deep breath. And I even envision almost like clean air coming in and bad air coming out with the bad thoughts. So that helps me. That's one of my visualizations.
It's a good one.
But just start breathing slowly, and it's going to reduce that urgency. Like I say, keep those thoughts in the frontal cortex and trying to make decisions rather than reacting emotionally to things.
So what we know about coping is that we build these skills before we need them. Yeah. So like so many things that we've talked about in previous episodes, practicing when we're calm or practicing when the discomfort is minimal helps us to build...
Oh, muscle memory.
Muscle memory. Very good. Thank you. The intellectual muscle memory.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not hard to practice being exposed to mild discomfort. You don't have to go very far to find something that if you really wanted to be bothered by it, you could be. So when you find yourself mildly irritated, use that moment to practice before things get out of hand and remind yourself, this is just discomfort, it's not danger, this isn't impacting me, I'm safe, I'm good, and then refocus your attention somewhere else.
Yeah, and with those 3 phases that I told you about, the first one is messing up and then realizing, oh man, I should have done that better. Analyze that. In those same situations, if you didn't handle yourself with the discomfort, go practice this scenario with your newfound tools now. Say, next time this happens,
Yep.
I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm not going to react.
That's right.
And then they're going to expect me to react. In fact, some of them might actually be doing something just to provoke you in some cases. And you're like, I'm not going to give them that this time.
That's right.
And that's going to strengthen you. And that will start rewiring your brain to more acceptance rather than judgment, reactivity, and negative emotionality.
Absolutely. So we want to sit with irritation without fixing it if we can. That's just good practice for coping. Do I really need to address this? Do I really need to stop this behavior? Or can I just sit here and notice that my internal world is safe and I'm okay and I don't have to focus on this so much?
We want to identify these things now as a new perception of strength. It's not yelling. It's not screaming. It's not dominating. That is not strength. That is fragility. When I'd like to put this blanket statement out that you can consider. If you need anyone else to accommodate you or supplement you or support you in those moments, those are identifiers that you need to work on those coping skills. Because everything we should be able to, outside of direct contact, direct abuse, direct interference, those are the kind of things that we should be able to learn skills. We should be able to change our identification of these situations as they just are.
Exactly.
They're not bad. They're not great.
They just are.
They're just happening. That's the way the world is.
Exactly. So coping skills help us to adapt to a world that is changing all the time. So it's a great strength. We don't need to control the world around us. That doesn't make us strong. Coping and being flexible in the face of constant change is actually the greatest strength we can have.
Yeah. It will set you free. It really will. When you're not judging every single thing, you're just like, I'll just figure out a way to deal with this. And even that thought right there sort of sets you up for progress and for growth. Just saying, rather than reacting to this, I'm going to think about this later and see how I can work on it. That right there was a coping skill.
Yes.
Even if you don't go on to figure out a better way, the fact that you interrupted it and you thought about something else, first of all, it shows that you can. And second of all, that in itself was developed as a coping skill.
Yeah. And when you look at it that way, coping is actually the best form of self-control you can have, because it means that no matter what is going on around you, you have an emotional constant. You have constant calm because you've developed the skills you need to manage your own internal environment. That's actually where strength is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So for reflection and practice, think about things that bother you repeatedly and ask yourself why. Why is this bothering me? And then try to come up with alternatives. What are those expectations that are underneath? And are they even realistic, or are they patterns that were put on you that you absorbed and that you've practiced over and over again just because they were put on you? It might have been something that a parent frequently did. And you realize that has become part of you now, but it's not a personality trait. It's a learned behavior.
That's right.
And with that learned behavior, we can learn other behaviors that'll make that one go away.
So to practice this week, we want you to choose one irritation, just one thing that has bothered you in the past, and we want you not to fix it, and we want you not to confront it. And instead, we want you to observe your own internal response. For those of us who like journaling, write it down or talk about it with a trusted friend or partner. But don't fix it, don't control it, just sit with it and become more aware of how it's impacting you and if it really needs to impact you at all.
Yeah, that's really important too. Believe it or not, just not getting involved, that's once again a coping skill. Instead of creating conflict for someone else in this moment because of something that you're not able to handle effectively, you're actually coping now by pulling yourself out of the situation.
Yep, absolutely right.
Yeah. So when everything bothers us, the problem's not the world. Sometimes it's our coping capacity. It's the way we look at things. I've heard people like, if I could just get away for a week, I'd feel so much better. While that might be true, you've created that idea. And if you continue to think that until I get that thing, I'm just going to stay frustrated, that's not coping.
Right.
So all these things, if this person would just leave, everything will be better. All those kind of things are, once again, depending on somebody else for your comfort. So what can you do independent of every other person that can improve your coping ability, build your strength, and build your resilience overall?
So when we build our own coping skills, we stop asking other people to carry our emotional weight for us. And even more importantly, we take ownership back so that we're managing our own emotional landscape, which is the best way to feel peaceful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's all we got to say about this topic. Our next show is going to be on self-awareness. So that's sort of why we did the coping one first, because that way you won't be as mad at us when you watch the next one, because self-awareness is something really interesting. If you want to get a jump on that next podcast, I highly recommend the book Insight by Dr. Tasha Eurich. It was mind-blowing. I mean, it was life-changing. In fact, when we first started working on the Honest Voice Project, people that wanted, let me see your draft. I want to read what you got in there so far. I'm like, okay, you can read that, but I need you to read this insight book first. Yeah, because Honest Voice talks a lot about human behavior, and it'd be real easy if you didn't have the coping skills to immediately dismiss what we're saying, just like these podcasts. Most of these podcasts, if you have that third mindset of critical feedback, this is just data, it's not good, it's not bad, it's just information that I can use and possibly improve my life. Or you can say those people are a bunch of judgy brats that just think that we should all be calm and quiet and not interact with each other. That's not what's going on. It's sort of sad how miserable so many people are. And we're in the mental health field, so we're sort of bombarded with that kind of stuff. I mean, everything that people bring to us is because of conflict or sadness or dysfunction of some sort. So this really is just trying to give back.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. So we'll see you next time when we talk about self-awareness.
Have a great day, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.